Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Family, work, school, you've got a lot going on. I'm Aisha Roscoe from NPR. We know you're busy, so we've made staying informed easy. The Boise State Public Radio mobile app is a hassle-free way to keep up with the latest news and stories. Whether you're cooking dinner, folding laundry, or just tackling your daily to-do list, staying in the know has never been so simple. Download the free Boise State Public Radio app today, so even when you're busy, you'll never miss a beat. And join me for Weekend Edition every Sunday morning from 6 to 10 on Boise State Public Radio News.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. We're going to spend the next hour getting you updated on the news that made headlines this last week. And today, our panelists include outdoors reporter Nicole Blanchard with Idaho Statesman, Lisa Lett with EastIdahoNews.com, Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer, and Logan Finney with Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television. There's a lot to get to, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And Logan, I want to start with you, and I want to begin with the big news of the day, which is after 81 days, the Idaho legislative session ended the 2026 session last night. So, Logan, it felt like a fairly divisive and chaotic session with budget cuts being a major topic. Can you begin with explaining why there was a need for these cuts?
Absolutely, I can, Gemma. Thanks for having me on. First, I want to say it's always a pleasure to come on and a highlight of my legislative session, being able to talk to you guys. And what good luck for me that Sine Die has finally happened, right?
Right?
Um, Budget cuts were the big issue this year. It goes back to back over the summer and back in October, the state government, the projections that they have for the revenues coming in, how much tax money the state is collecting, those projections were lagging behind over the summer. So Governor Brad Little ordered state agencies to hold back part of their budget in the fall. That kind of happened in October. After he made that order for the agencies to hold back 3% of their budgets, they were also directed to extend that 3% into the oncoming fiscal year, which is the budgets that the lawmakers came and were working on. So the lawmakers were doing double duty on the budgets this year. They were both trimming out things from the budget year that was almost finished, that they had already written the budgets for last year. And then this year they had to craft the new budgets with this lower amount of money. So basically, it was a big old math problem that they walked into, and it was a big tangled mess of spreadsheets and formulas and accounts to balance out. And depending on who you're talking to at the end of the day, some of the lawmakers say it was totally unnecessary because we've got money in the bank in the rainy day fund, or the savings account, it's sometimes called. The state has a lot of money on hand, but rather than tap into it, the leading policymakers and the folks who actually make the decisions down there said, it's not raining yet. We have to be prepared in case the broader economy happens to crash. We don't want to be sitting on an empty savings account if that were to happen. So we need to cut anywhere that we can to pad the bottom line and make sure that the ledger balance is out at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so Logan, you said that, they started with this 3% cut. But now state agencies will see even bigger cuts. And this goes into fiscal year 2027, which starts on July 1. So how did we go from 3% cuts to, I believe, what will be potentially 5% cuts for some of the state departments come July 1?
Yes, yeah, it was kind of this is part of why it took so long for the legislature to finish their work this year. And I even heard multiple seasoned veteran lawmakers say they were taken aback at how long it just took for the general budget bills to make it out to the floor this year. It seems like it took a lot longer for the behind the scenes processes of JFAC to get the legislation put together as well. So the governor ordered 3% holdbacks, and then, like every year, the governor comes and he gives his State of the State address and his budget priorities for the year, and it's very detailed and it's very complex and very well thought out, but ultimately it is just a recommendation and a suggestion. So the lawmakers said, thank you so much for the plan. We're going to take it and we're going to add another percentage onto it. So what happened, what ended up happening was a 4% total cut for the prior fiscal year. So they cut more than Little had even directed the agencies to originally. And then Little had said this 3% cut, we're going to continue it. And Little's team and staff were confident that was enough to make the math balance out. But the legislature, again through the budget committee, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, they said, no, we're nervous about income and the projections, and we want to make sure that we pad the bottom line aspect of the budget as much as we can. So they added another 2% on for 27, for fiscal year 27, which, like you said, is the fiscal year that starts over the summer. So yeah, it's an across the board cut, and it's also specifically a cut to what is called the general fund. So some of the
Mm.
agencies are kind of unique, like Fish and Game or the Transportation Department. They don't get just like your regular income tax and sales tax dollars directly like some other agencies do. They have dedicated funds. So like Fish and Game gets the money from hunting licenses. The gasoline sales tax goes specifically towards the highways and the roads. So those folks have dedicated funding sources and they didn't have to cut those back. But if you get money from the general fund, which is just the general big bucket of money that the legislature uses, it's the main checking account. If you were pulling money from the general fund, that is the money that you had to cut back. So depending on the size of your agency, if you have a really big budget or a really small budget, and depending on how much of it is dedicated versus federal funds versus general funds, even though it was portrayed as an across the board cut to every agency, every single agency was affected dramatically differently.
So, bottom line, Logan, what do you think are, as a main takeaway for folks to understand about this latest session?
If I had to go back to what we heard on Idaho Reports this week, we had a really great, robust conversation with Representative Brent Crane, who's a very conservative and seasoned veteran lawmaker out of Nampa. He's also the House State Affairs Committee chairman. He joined us for a conversation with Senate Minority Leader Senate Minority Caucus Chair Janie Ward Engelking, who is a public school educator and a Democrat out of Boise. They don't see eye to eye on many of the policy issues, but they shared a very similar diagnosis of issues they saw with the process and policies and how the rules were implemented and followed this year. And specifically, Representative Crane said he's concerned that the way the process worked this year is going to be damaging toward Idahoans' trust in their government and trust that they can follow what's
Mm.
going on and what is happening in the public's eye.
So, Brian, I want to bring you into the conversation because before the end of the session, some legislators were trying to get a bill passed that would impact teachers' unions. You wrote an opinion piece about this, and this bill was advanced using a legislative maneuver called radiator capping. For people who aren't familiar with that process, can you explain what it means and how it allowed lawmakers to avoid a public hearing on the actual policy?
Sure. So, radiator capping refers to sort of a made-up situation in which you take your car into the mechanic to get it fixed, and they wind up replacing every part but the radiator cap.
Hmm.
And so, by analogy, the remaining radiator cap, the only part of your car that's left in the legislative process is the bill number. So, what they did was they took a bill that had already advanced and they took the language of a different bill that was stalled and they amended the bill that was moving so that the stalled bill's language was inserted into it. What this allowed them to do is to bypass a lot of the normal legislative process where you have committee hearings on these bills. So as a consequence of that, even though this bill is aimed at busting teachers' unions, um, the teachers' unions did not have a chance to speak on it. That's why I argued that a more understandable phrase to describe the process is the coward's maneuver rather than radiator capping.
And Brian, at the center of your column was House Bill 516. So, what would this bill actually have changed for teachers and teachers unions here in Idaho if it had become law?
Well, it still might become law. It's
Okay.
been passed and it's sitting in front of the governor awaiting a signature. So we're not sure what's going to happen with it yet. Um, but what will happen if it becomes law is it just contains a whole variety of measures that are meant to sort of throw sand in the gears of these unions. One common thing, so unions are funded by dues. If you decide to become a member of a union, you pay dues. Um, a common way that this is done both in the public and private sector is referred to as dues deduction, where basically the employer's payroll just takes care of that. While they're also paying
Hmm.
FICA taxes and everything else, they also process the union dues. This would make that illegal. So that makes it just makes it a lot more complicated to go through the process of collecting dues. It may introduces more chances for somebody to forget to do something, for there to be more errors. This is all intentional. If you look at the language of the people behind it, what they are most concerned about is the political activity of these unions, and so they want to starve them and drive down membership.
So, in your opinion piece, Brian, you argued that the purpose of the legislation is to weaken teachers' unions, but supporters of this legislation might say it's about limiting union influence in public schools. So, what rationale have lawmakers given for the bill? And have any teachers or even like the Idaho Education Association responded to these arguments?
So one argument that is commonly made with regard to that dues deduction issue by proponents of the bill is that we are using taxpayer dollars, for example, to help collect union dues or taxpayer, public resources. There's a technical sense in which that might be true in as much as the payroll office at a public school is doing this processing, but it's completely rote and automatic. So it actually, if you look at the fiscal note of the original bill that was introduced that contained the same language, it does not project any savings for the state. So the state
Mm.
is not expected to save any money by preventing the use of public resources. Um, so that's an example of an argument that the proponents make in favor of it. What I think rightly that the Idaho Education Association is responding is like this is really about is about trying to break the teachers' unions, trying to drive down union membership, trying to drive down the influence of collective bargaining.
All right, appreciate that, Brian. Nicole, an Idaho Fish and Game Commissioner is facing criminal misdemeanor charges. This is around an alleged illegal elk hunting. So, who is this commissioner, and what do investigators say happened during the incident that ended up leading to these charges?
Hi, Gemma. So, yeah, this is the Upper Snake Region Commissioner. His name is Brody Harshbarger, and he has been charged with 7 misdemeanor counts related to an alleged incident from back in December. He represents the region that's headquartered in Idaho Falls, and it includes Fremont County. So, if you're familiar with the Island Park area,
Hmm.
this is where this allegedly took place. And he, according to court documents, was with another man and was shooting at elk. And it's not totally clear which one of them may have hit the animals, but there were 2 bull elk that were killed. And neither one of those individuals had the tags to legally harvest the elk. And
Mm.
then some of the complaints against the commissioner also alleged that he had been shooting from the driver's seat of a vehicle, that he had shot across a public highway, and that he had trespassed on private property. So there are a couple different allegations kind of tied up in that incident. And that's kind of noteworthy just because the commission, if people aren't aware, is the group of 7 people, so one from each region in the fish and game regions, that are responsible for setting rules and regulations. And so that's kind of what makes this noteworthy.
Mm. Okay, so with that said, Nicole, has the governor's office or even the Fish and Game Commission responded at all while this case is making its way through the court system?
So it's interesting that the charges were just filed at the beginning of March, and nobody's really said anything so far. So the commission serves at the appointment of the governor. The governor's office hasn't said anything directly. I reached out to them for comment, and all they did was provide a letter from a representative from their office. It seems that Commissioner Harshbarger reached out and informed the governor's office of the charges, and said he would voluntarily recuse himself from any
Mm,
commission affairs in the interest of transparency and fairness. And it sounds like he's not stepped down entirely. Um, the commission hasn't addressed the incident at all, and Fish and Game has declined to comment, citing the fact that he is not an actual employee of the department.
okay, appreciate that. So, Nicole, an Idaho doctor who treats women with high risk pregnancies is suing the state of Idaho. My understanding is the trial, which will be in federal court, is set for this summer, and it could test our state's current abortion laws. So, what is this lawsuit challenging in our state's abortion laws, and what change is that doctor asking the court to make?
That's right, Gemma. So we've had obviously a lot of lawsuits over the past couple of years that are challenging
Mhm.
the abortion laws in Idaho. This one is from a maternal fetal medicine specialist in Boise, Dr. Stacy Seib, and he is trying to challenge some of the health exceptions in the laws, or what he says are the lack of health exceptions. So right now, there's not really any provision in Idaho law if you are pregnant and your pregnancy threatens your health. The law really spells out an exception for when the life of a pregnant person is at risk. And
Mhm.
while the Idaho Attorney General's office has said that that includes opportunities for when danger isn't imminent, doctors have said that they really are unclear on what exactly that means, and they're not totally comfortable with the idea that that's not clear language. So, this lawsuit is hoping to make that very clear, and it's also specifically wanting to address mental health, because our former mortality board that looked at mortality for pregnant and postpartum women found that most mortality for people who are pregnant or have just given birth are related to mental health issues. And so right
Mm.
now it's specifically forbidden to perform an abortion if somebody's wanting one or needing one because they're at risk of self-harm, and this seeks to specifically make an exception in those cases.
So, Nicole, is that really what the physician who filed the case is trying to say that the current law is that's why it makes it difficult for him to treat patients with serious pregnancy complications? Is part of what you just described with how the current law is?
So he's a maternal fetal medicine specialist, and those people see particularly high risk pregnancies. So
Hmm.
he I'm not totally certain where he is on seeing people with mental health issues. I know he sees people with like fatal fetal anomalies. He sees people who
Hmm.
have health issues that are um, inside or that are created by or exacerbated by pregnancy. And so he has said that he sees patients where normally he would be performing a couple abortions per month prior to the overturn of Roe v. Wade, that would alleviate those health issues. And at this point, he is referring multiple patients a month out of state to get that kind of care because those patients are at risk of continued health complications, or they are carrying pregnancies that are not going to make it to term because
Hmm.
our law doesn't allow for him to perform those procedures in his argument.
So, Nicole, if the doctor were to win this case, how could that decision impact abortion care and medical practice in Idaho?
So there's still a lot of complicated restrictions, and there's a lot of other lawsuits that are still happening. St. Luke's health system still currently has a lawsuit going on with the state about EMTALA, which, if you remember, that is a similar kind of continuation of the case that went
Hmm.
all the way up to the US Supreme Court. And that sort of addresses some of these similar issues about health and emergency care. It's hard to say exactly what it would mean, but this is an issue that has come up again and again. This was also kind of at issue with the Adkins v. Little trial that took place in Ada County last year about health and people's ability to get abortions to address their own health issues. Um, so it's hard to say, but clearly this is an issue that people are very concerned about, and that has come up incrementally, and so it certainly would make a difference in kind of the arguments that we're seeing and the the cases that Idaho is dealing with in the court right now.
Mhm. All right, appreciate that update, Nicole. Lisa, switching gears entirely, folks may not know that there's a big Coca-Cola presence in Eastern Idaho, and they are now looking at consolidating all of their plants. So, where will this new facility be located, and why did the company choose to put it in this particular area for the project?
Yeah, so Swire Coca-Cola in Pocatello and Idaho Falls is consolidating their two facilities into a brand new state-of-the-art facility that's going to be built right on the Bingham and Bonneville County line. Technically, it's Bonneville County, but it's right next to Shelley, next to the Anheuser-Busch plant. And kind of the reason for the move is the facilities in Pocatello and Idaho Falls are getting too old and they're outgrowing them, especially the Pocatello facility, which is 115 years old. And it used to actually be
Oh.
the old bottling plant back in the old days. So this is actually a good thing for the company and will overall be a good thing for East Idaho's economy.
So, what could this change mean then? In particular, Lisa, I mean, yes, good for the economy, but what does it mean for the employees? I mean, who currently work at the two existing facilities, and on top of that, for those communities when that consolidation happens.
So really, the biggest impact is going to be in Pocatello because the facility is still going to be on the north end, next to Idaho Falls. So those workers aren't really going to be affected. It's my understanding that the employees on the Pocatello end have been offered incentive packages to either move or to commute. So it's kind of up to them what decision they want to make, if they want to stay with the company or if they want to choose to go on and find other employment. But other than that, it shouldn't really, I don't think any jobs are going to be lost, and they might actually even end up hiring more people once everything gets going.
Because, just for clarification, I mean, you said it's near Shelley, right? The new facility will be, and that is really close to Idaho Falls, so it wouldn't
Uh-huh.
impact employees there.
Uh-huh.
Logan, you recently reported on data centers and why Idaho is a really attractive location for them. And in your reporting, you pointed out two main reasons why. So that first one is lower electric prices. Can you explain why this matters?
Absolutely, I can. As folks are probably painfully aware, as it hits their wallets, our power bills are generally going up. And that's the case across the country. But here in Idaho, we are blessed to have really abundant, specifically hydropower generation. The Snake River is just top to bottom littered with dams that help contribute to Idaho's power grid. And hydro is a really big generation resource. It accounts for a large portion of Idaho Power's generation specifically. So Idaho has lower rates than much of the rest of the country because of where we are geographically and how our power grid is set up. And so if you're a big data center builder, especially in the current era where these hyperscale, massive, super huge data centers that are going to require a lot of power, if you're looking to build one of those, a state where someplace where power is not that expensive is going to be a really appealing place for you, which we've seen with facilities like the Meta data center that they're building out on the
Hmm.
eastern edge of CUNA.
Okay, so the other reason is a friendly business climate. So tell us about this and why that's important to these folks who run and own these data centers.
Sure. Yeah. Idaho is a very business friendly state. We like to, when I say we, I mean the Idaho legislature likes to cut taxes
Hmm.
to try and incentivize businesses to locate here and pay their employees well. And the state government is generally speaking very laissez-faire, hands-off when it comes to managing economic matters. We do have a few economic development incentives that the Commerce Department runs. We have one specific sales tax exemption for data center developers. This was passed in 2020 when it was kind of in vogue across the country. All sorts of states were passing incentives, sales tax rebates, sales tax exemptions, property tax exemptions, trying to trying to draw these data centers to their states, assuming it was going to be the next big economic boom, which it turns out to have been. States like
Oh,
Virginia really committed to this, and basically all of Loudoun County, Virginia, is just wall-to-wall data centers, and that is something that folks do not want to see happen here, especially as Idaho is already growing and starting to kind of, in some folks' eyes, lose its rural charm and character a little bit, as we've seen so much growth over the last couple decades.
and you even spoke to one owner of a local data center. I believe it's called Valor C3. What did he tell you about working in the Treasure Valley?
Yeah, I visited the Valor C3, the existing Valor C3 facility in Boise, and spoke with their CEO, Jim Bowie, who was gracious enough to show me around the facility. And some of the footage from our site tour and my interview with him is in our episode of Idaho Reports this week, which folks can go check out at idahoreports.org or in the PBS app. And Jim told me they don't actually take any of those economic development incentives directly. He said they're not taking advantage of the sales tax exemption or anything like that. They just really like Idaho and they care about Idaho
Hmm.
and their business model specifically. Valor C3, they're not one of the big like Oracle or Meta or some of those other ones that you've
Hmm.
heard about in the news. They serve specifically small businesses. So they are small to medium businesses. He didn't give me any specific names, but for example, they serve healthcare industries, other businesses. Basically, he said the situation is if you've got a computer room and an IT person, and you've got to the point where the closet is too full, but you don't need a whole data center, you can come lease a space in the Valor C3 location. So they were a really interesting mix of like they have some of their own servers, but mostly it's like a rental space. So they had lots of
Hmm.
racks that are leased out to different clients. They're kind of a
Okay.
standard industrial use, he said, as far as Idaho Power goes.
Hmm.
Their current site is about 5 megawatts.
Okay, but you also said in your reporting that they're expanding. But I do want to talk about the fact that, as you mentioned, Meta, they
Hmm.
have this huge data center they're building. And then you also mentioned in your reporting about Gemstone Technology Park that's being planned as well. And all of this has an impact on our power grid. So what are the concerns that some people are having about these data centers?
Sure. Yeah, and this is really the reason, this is the bug that bit me that made me want to do this story over the summer. Whenever I talk about data centers to people in the policy arena, the first place their mind goes is that Meta building and how controversial it has been in CUNA and the issues with the sales taxes and with the water treatment and with the urban renewal districts. And I said, I don't want to do a story about any of that. I want to talk to the power company. Uh, and so we went out there and the existing smaller kind of standard data facilities, like I mentioned, Valor C3, their existing plant is 5 megawatts. They're building an expansion to make it 10 megawatts. But as we're looking at Meta and its big Facebook data center that's already been retooled before it was finished to accommodate the AI work that they're needing to do, it's more on the scale of 200 to 300 megawatts. So just a complete order of magnitude different. They're contracting with Idaho Power to install a massive 250 megawatt solar array out in southern Ada County, kind of out, I believe, near the prison complex in kind of that scrubland because the commission has
Mm.
not been wanting to convert farmland, irrigable farmland into solar. That's another local issue. But so Meta is investing in this power generation specifically for their site. The Gemstone Technology Park right next door is being developed by a company called Diode, and it's expected to be 600 to 800 megawatts when it is up and running. Uh, and just for reference, I know a megawatt is a very conceptual, it's kind of a fuzzy number to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
Adam Richens with Idaho Power, he's their executive vice president. He told me uh, a megawatt is roughly, think of it like a large office building that's running all day. It takes about a megawatt of power. So if you've got a bunch of data server warehouses that are taking 800 megawatts of power, that just kind of puts in your head how much electricity we're really talking about here. And so the legislature's been concerned that if we have a bunch of data centers moving in, it's going to make everybody's bills go up.
Okay, so that gets me to the point of that some people want these data centers to be regulated by the state. Um, is that something that lawmakers are open to or looking into?
Yes, specifically Representative Stephanie Mickelson from over in Eastern Idaho. She got a bill across the finish line this year. She's worked almost 2 years on it, and I spoke with her a couple times about it, as well as her son, who's politically involved and also a farmer over there in Eastern Idaho with the ground pumper irrigators. They said that they've already been seeing their power rates go up, and if they continue to go up faster because data centers move in, then it's a real threat to their business model and to the state's agricultural industries. So they talking to Idaho Power, kind of the existing process is when these large load users, like a new data center, go to the Public Utilities Commission, they're supposed to pay for the cost of what it takes to bring the power to them. Because these public utilities are monopolies, they're regulated monopolies, it's called. You don't get to just like unplug your Idaho Power cable and plug in a competitor cable that's out on the
Mm-hmm.
street. It doesn't work that way. They're a utility and they're regulated as such. So as that is happening, the company has to pay for the transmission lines, the transformers, the equipment to hook their data center into the power grid. And so the industry has said, we're paying our way, we're doing fine, growth is paying for growth. But when I'm talking to the Mickelsons and other folks, their perspective is the data center folks may be paying for the infrastructure in the moment that they're actually contracting and building. But what they're not paying for is Idaho Power looking at the future. When Idaho Power is doing all of its modeling and looking ahead, they're saying, if we're going to expect this much growth, we need to prepare and we need to build out all of these generation resources. They're, for example, converting an old, I think it's a natural gas plant or a coal plant into a natural gas plant out in the Twin Falls Magic Valley area. So things like that. Mickelson said Idaho Power is looking at data centers coming, and so they are already preemptively increasing the generation and capacity they think they need. So even though the data centers haven't come yet, in a way we're kind of prepaying for them because we're expecting them to
Mm.
come. Is kind of in a roundabout way the argument that the Mickelsons were making when I was
Mm-hmm.
speaking with them. So the piece of legislation that
Okay.
passed, it took lots of
Uh-huh.
negotiating back and forth. It was 4 or 5 different bills over the last couple years, but House Bill 911, a fitting bill number if I've ever heard one, has headed to the governor's desk. He hadn't signed it yet yesterday, and I didn't check on that before coming on air, so my apologies. But it would require any facilities that are expected to use more than 50 megawatts over 5 years. So that's a very high bar. Wouldn't catch people like Valor C3, but definitely would catch people like Meta. If the governor
Mm.
signs it into law, then those people have to go through not an entirely new process, but just a more strict review to really make sure that existing customers are protected and any new large load user is paying its full cost of new service when it comes to the state.
So bottom line, Logan, what has Idaho Power said about all of this and also the increased electric costs that people are seeing and most people are saying, well, we've got these data centers, that's why our electric bill is going up.
In some places like Virginia, that might be true, but here in Idaho, we have a couple data centers, but we don't have a ton. The reason, according to Idaho Power, that everybody's bills are going up is just because we're growing. We've had just as much, if not more, residential growth, new homes and subdivisions going in, as we have new big manufacturing plants, whether it be a data center or a more traditional Idaho voice and presence like Micron and their big fab plant that they're building out south of Boise. That's going to be another really big large load power user, even though it's not a data center, which is kind of the popular boogeyman these days. So the
Mm.
state is looking at the large load users to protect the folks from electric bills. But Idaho Power, when I talked with Adam Richins, he acknowledged that they don't like it when their bills go up so fast. He acknowledged that people weren't happy about the 7 or 8% increase that Idaho Power passed on to folks in their rates over the last year. But he said they don't have that much of a choice in it because just like everyone else, they're dealing with inflation, they're dealing with tariffs, the price of the logs for the power poles, the price of the transformers, just all the stuff that they have to buy, not to mention the gas to drive the vehicles, just like everybody else. Idaho Power may be a big shareholder owned company, but the world is still expensive and they're still having to pay more for the equipment that they use every day. So
Hmm.
because of the way the utility system works, part of that does get passed along to the customers, unfortunately.
Well, appreciate all of the reporting on this, Logan. Definitely learned a lot. Nicole, you recently reported on the fact that Idaho is transferring hundreds of incarcerated people to out of state prisons. This is because of overcrowding. What is causing the overcrowding in the prisons right now?
So it's interesting that Logan was just talking about all the growth that we've had because that is definitely a factor that's causing some of the overcrowding. There are quite a few other factors. I mean, we have not had a ton of legislative buy-in on expanding our prisons and jails. There have been some attempts to do that that have been kind of shot down over recent years. We also have a pretty high amount of people in the system who are in for like substance abuse and drug related offenses. We've
Hmm.
got a lot of people who are in on parole violations and things like that. So those are all kind of contributing together to the overpopulation.
And Nicole, so with that said, has the state looked into fixing this problem, or is this a permanent solution, or do we know?
So this is definitely being touted as temporary. The Idaho Department of Correction, or IDOC, has said that they don't want to keep people out of state permanently. Certainly, the people who are sent out of state won't be kept there for the duration of their sentences. Um, but they don't want to be contracting with these private prisons out of state forever, is my
Mm,
understanding. Even though we've been doing it for almost or about 10 years now. So the idea is to expand at some of the existing prisons. There's a new women's facility that is going to be opening here in the Boise area soon. But part of the problem with that is that the only people that we're sending out of state right now are men.
mm,
So building the new women's facility and having, 500 beds open up there doesn't really address the issue where we're sending men out of state. So there are some projects in the works, and IDOC has some information about this available on their website about a couple hundred beds that they have planned to open up in the next year or so. But they're about 1,500 beds off from what is currently available and what the current prison population is, and so those couple hundred
mm.
beds still isn't really going to address the gap.
Mhm. Lisa, I've just got about a minute and a half left, but I do want to quickly get to this story because Blackfoot's chief of police is retiring after 26 years on the force. So, with his retirement coming up later this month, what happens next for this department and the search for a new police chief?
Do you know the new mayor, Scott Stufflebeam of Blackfoot, is going to announce a new police chief at the city council meeting on April 7th, next Tuesday. So we'll find out who it
Oh,
is.
wow. Okay, and very quickly, the retiring chief. I mean, that's a long storied career at the department.
You know it is, and he's actually pretty young too. He's only in his mid 50s, and he said that he is retiring to give other people in the department a chance to get promoted and grow, and to spend more time with his wife. And he's going out with a bang because he actually earned the Idaho Peace Officer Standards and Training Certificate right before his retirement, which is a big deal.
That really is. Well, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us today. We've been speaking with Nicole Blanchard with the Idaho Statesman, Lisa Leet with EastIdahoNews.com, Brian Clark joined us earlier with the Idaho Statesman, and Logan Finney with Idaho Public Television. And thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. Do you have thoughts about today's episode? Make sure you email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or reach out on our socials. And if you haven't yet, could I ask you to leave us a review wherever you listen? We read every single one, and we'd love to hear from you.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho Voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.